Well, hello, everybody. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? It is Sam. It is Wednesday. It is probably episode, 265 at this point. It is the end of July, and man, what a summer it has been for me. Excited to talk to you this evening. Has some awesome stuff, personal stuff happening. Got family in town. Love that. It's been a very busy real estate season going into the spring, through the spring into the summertime. So I thought I'd take this evening to go into some specifics that would build onto other things I've talked about in other videos about moving to the area in the summertime and the fall. Because in the last few weeks, we've talked about how to prepare for moving here, but transitioning, right? So some people don't always want to move straight from where they're moving to where they're coming here in Virginia Beach or Williamsburg or wherever. So so they want to try and do it in increments. So they try and figure out what's the best way to do it, right? What's the best process to maximize my dollar, but also maximize the time that I have so I can get the best house for my money. Well, tonight we're going to talk about, now that we're into July, through the end of July, we really focused last time on the importance of July if you want to find a house right now. Because as you get into August, September, October, you'll see less listings at the market. Specifically, also, you'll notice a big drop in August because for a couple of reasons. We'll talk about those reasons in a minute. But um, now that we've moved past July, or we're about to leave July, if you add 30 days to right now, today's the 24th of July, the 24th of August is, let's say we found a house today, the closing time would be somewhere around the 24th of August. So if that's true, then there aren't many days left to get a house before the school season begins. So that's telling me that as we're getting into the August time period, we're into a different season. And what do you do now that we're moving into that season? There are a lot of times people have made decisions. They're moving here and they may have already bought a house. For example, hey, Michelle, how are you? From Williamsburg. Awesome. Do you live in Williamsburg right now? Or are you moving to Williamsburg? Or I guess you're in Williamsburg now. So are you moving? Or curious. Anyway, or are you staying and you love talking about real estate and talking about neighborhoods? Because that's what I do or like doing. So anyway, going back into, so if you're going back into August, August is a change of season, a change of strategy from what July looks like. And so what I want to do is build off of what the plan is in July and say, okay, now what in August? Because like I just was about to mention, is people that were moving in June or July after the spring season, past the school season ending, for example, they had to make a decision. Do I want to buy a house right away, or do I want to find a rental, long term, short term? What do I do there? How do I make that transition? And if you haven't found a house yet and aren't closing anytime in the next 30 days, you might be starting to think, well, should I start doing a short-term rental, doing something to keep me going until I find the right house? And if you're in that position, if you haven't found the house yet, what I've done is I wanted to make a list of some strategies and things to keep in mind and things to be prepared for between now and the end of the year, and really the end of like the next several months before the spring season, so you can know how to prepare to move, how to pick the right house, so that, because a lot of, as you get into a rental situation, you're trying to wait for the right house, it's very easy to get into a reactive situation where you're trying to find the right house, but you just want to get it over with. It happens all the time. And what don't want you to do is try to eliminate the feeling of trying just to get it done and then sacrificing the ability to get the house that you want and wishing if you just waited a little bit longer, you would have gotten the right house. And I've seen that so many times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a PowerPoint and share my screen with you and talk about how to find a house in the fall. My Zillow estimate is skyrocketing. Virginia Beach prices look very steep. Yeah. I'm guessing you're in Virginia Beach. Yes, I will say that Zestimates, they can be deceiving. Zestimates I'm not saying that they're not all wrong, but a lot of times I've noticed that even when you list a house, if you list a house, the Zestimate often reacts to the new listing price. So it just kind of confirms the idea that Zestimates will only tell you a portion of the story. It is nice though to have a Zestimate just higher than what you're listing your house for, just for the sake of just the mental part of it. But that being said, I've seen it all over the place. But prices have gone up, and we are at the highest median sales price in Virginia Beach right now, I think, ever. And I think that's going to drop down. And it always happens in the fall. But next year, I still, there's a whole theory behind this. I've talked about this in other videos about, okay, do I think that because of the market, the rates changing, if it goes down, what does that mean? I could see it really going both ways. And to be honest with you, I really don't know what is going to happen next with that. But we can talk about that in the future months as we prepare for the spring next year. But right now, I've seen rates starting to settle a little bit. And if you get a house now and maybe they drop enough, you might be able to refinance. But again, it all depends on math thing, right? It depends on how long you're going to be staying in the house and how much money it costs you to refinance and all that kind of stuff. So my house on the inside needs a lot of work, not accounted for. Yep. That Zillow has no idea what the inside of your house looks like. And it's a great example of what they can't do, and some people did a lot of work to their house and Zillow doesn't know that either, So I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation with you. I hope I think this is going to be very helpful, actually. And this is going to be about how to pick the right house in 2024, the end of 2024. And you see this here? Okay. How to pick the right house in 2024. Number one is remember your budget. Okay. What does that mean? Obviously, it means that if you're trying to buy a house in general, you've got to know how much money you can spend, right? Well, that can mean a lot of different things. Number one is you got to factor in your moving costs. So moving costs could just be moving from one house to another, from out of town to your new house. It could also mean how much does it cost to move all your stuff into a rental and then move it again, or do an Airbnb and then put your stuff in storage. All those things, moving your car, that kind of stuff can all factor into what your moving costs are, right? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Monthly costs in waiting for a house. Okay, so the main thing here is the idea that it's probably a rental situation. So how much money are you spending on a monthly basis to wait for the house that you want? Now, if you get a short-term rental, you're probably paying more per month, but it gives you the flexibility to not, if you find a house in the middle of October and it's a 6-month lease as opposed to a 12-month lease, you might not be having to pay as much to get out of it, or you might not be able to get out of it if you did a 12-month lease. So there's a lot of factors there. But point being is that you got monthly costs in waiting. That's number two. Number three is, what are interest rates doing? How much does that matter to you? And like we just said, we think that the interest rates might drop a little bit. If they do, how does that affect your plan? I'd say definitely a trust your loan officer situation. If you have a loan officer that does not check your rates on a regular basis and just locks you in, you can ask them, hey, how do you make a decision on how to lock your interest rate? If they're not checking that on a regular basis, I think that's a big, big problem. And that means that they might just lock you into whatever the current rate is, not paying attention to the fact that it might be worth it to just to kind of wait out a little bit. Maybe a day or two might change things. Who knows? So how are rates changing things? And what is the market doing where you want to move? Okay, that could just be citywide, Hampton, Newport News, Williamsburg, or Virginia Beach, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Suffolk, whatever. How is the city? Or also, what is that neighborhood doing? Has a house that you wanted in a specific neighborhood not gone on the market in a year or two? How does that factor in? What's the demand for the specific kind of neighborhood or house? Got to factor all that in and be mentally prepared so that when you see the house that you want, you have all this at your disposal without having to kind of do a rush recalibration at the time. The next is, how many arrows are in your quiver? What do I mean by that? I've talked about this concept before, which is, I talked about you've got down payment, right? How much money are you putting down for a house? If it's 20%, if it's 10%, or however much it is, 5 or 0 VA, knowing how much that is. You got VA funding fees, for example, how that's financed in, but also closing costs. How much are your closing costs for your loan? That's the number two thing. But number three is the thing that I do think people often forget when they're looking for a house, because they think, I'm just buying a house. I don't need to do any more elaborate adjustments and strategy. But the key thing here is the appraisal guarantee. That's an amount of money that people don't often factor into their process. So you've got down payment and closing costs, two big buckets. A third bucket is that appraisal guarantee. What does that mean? If you get a house under contract, if you have a loan on that house, the loan is often, not all the time, but often contingent on an appraisal. If that appraisal does not meet the amount that you're offering on the house, that means that there's a lot of details here, and we can talk about this in more details in different videos. But the concept is that if the house does not appraise, technically, if you don't have any other things in the contract written otherwise, the buyer does not have to buy the house unless the seller drops the price. And if they don't, you technically, in a lot of situations, could walk away in a lot of situations. But the appraisal guarantee says that if it does not appraise for the amount that I'm offering, how much money am I willing to give you above the appraisal value up to the amount I'm offering? That could be anywhere from $1,000 or less up to 10, 50, $100,000 or more. It could be anything based on the amount that you're offering relative to the how strong an offer that you want. Now, the idea here is that not that every amount of money that you're guaranteeing means you're going to be paying it. But the key is that if the appraisal doesn't come in, then you would be paying it based on however much money you need to be paying within the amount that you said that you would be willing to. So if you said you'd be willing to pay $10,000 over the appraisal and it appraises for $5,000 difference, most situations you would then be paying $5,000, not the 10. My point there is to say that when you're making this type of aggressive strategy, it's a very important and aggressive strategy, got to know that it's a bucket of money that might be used for the process, but is not included in the down payment or the initial closing costs. It's additional money, and so that's one of the biggest things that could be factored into money-wise your budget and the type of house that you might want. And the type of house that you might want might drastically change based on the amount of guarantee money you might be willing to offer or can offer. A lot of more details than that, but that's an important thing I want to mention because how many arrows in your quiver? If you start looking at houses that you have no chance at getting, but no one's telling you don't have a chance in getting, you could be going through a whole month of process of searching and then realize, why don't I have a house? Because you don't have the amount of arrows to kill the deer. I don't know. That's a terrible way to say that. I need to find a better analogy. I apologize for that. But you need to find a better, an appropriate amount of punch for the type of house that you want. If you want a house that might need some TLC, you might not need to do as much of the additional ammunition or go oomph to get a house. There are other strategies involved, but my point here is that it does depend on the type of house, and knowing based on what your agent tells you, what you see in the market, all that stuff is going to affect the type of house that you might be able to get based on the amount of money you have to work with, including all these things. And so the arrows portion is specifically for the making an offer, right? Interest rates too. But some of this involves the cost of just waiting for the right house. And what I do find that people often do is it's easy for people to say, well, I don't want to make an aggressive offer because I don't want to overpay for a house. But if you think about it, if you're paying $3,000 or $4,000 a month for a house, for a rental, and you have a 6-month rental, you're paying, let's say $20,000, $25,000, whatever, $20,000, let's just say, for a rental. And if you find a house the first month or so, and you might only be spending 5 or 7 in a rental, but alternatively, you might end up spending 15 or 20. It might be okay to be aggressive to get the right house and spend a little bit more, even though it might feel like you're paying too much, because it really comes down to the money you're allocating for everything, right? It's not just paying to get the right house and I don't want to pay too much. Well, again, you're paying money in other things too. So I don't want to say just throw caution to the wind, but definitely keep in mind all the things involved with the process and the costs involved in that process. So moving on. Consider typical human deadlines. I loved writing that phrase. I've never heard of that before, but consider. What does that mean? Okay. Well, number one is there are going to be quotes here there are going to be quotes here that will show examples of different types of mindsets or deadlines people have in their mind in the fall. Specifically, I want to be closed before school starts so I can enroll my kids on time. Okay, what does that mean? In this case, it means that demand for your house, or the house that you want, I should have written for the house that you want, may drop the farther you get past this deadline until a certain point. Okay, so for example, if we wait until the 4th of August, the chances of someone being able to close before school starts is a lot lower than it is right now, right? And as you go into the middle of August, the chances of you being able to close before school starts is almost zero. So the demand for houses based on the people that really wanted that as a motivating factor their demand may have changed. They may have then decided, I'll just do a rental. And then they're not as focused on finding the right house as much. They're just not going to move into the rental. And they may have let the house that you may have loved pass by because now they're not in that zone of really wanting a house. They've shifted attention, shifted focus. So that deadline, it's a fabricated deadline. It's like, okay, well, not everybody has that deadline, but a lot of people do. So knowing that range, that deadline has the most influence, can affect how you can address a specific house, how you can strategize about it, how you might know how many people might be interested in it, that kind of stuff. So knowing that is important. When I say until a certain point, that means until the next deadline starts approaching. So if you're looking at a screen, I should draw this out. There's like a heat map. If you got a heat map and the deadline for, actually, let me put this up here. Hang on just a second. Questions. There we go. If you have a heat map and it shows a map or a calendar, and on that calendar it shows, let's just say August. And during August, the first part of August has the deadline, that human deadline. I want to be closed before I can enroll my kids on time in school. That area near the front of August might be hot, or the end of July. But as you go into the middle part of August and early September, or late August, September, that heat map might become cool because it's like a blue, because people aren't as interested in that deadline, that fabricated deadline. So, but now they can focus on the next deadline. What is that next deadline? I want to be closed before the holidays. Okay, now we're talking about, there's often a demand bump somewhere in the late September, October range until early November. Never exactly the same, but median sales prices tend to rise for about a month during the fall before the holidays sometime. It's not always, and usually the graphs don't go linear. You'll see often a bump and then it goes back down again. And that could just be, hey, Sam, it's just randomness. I do find that somewhere in October, there's some kind of extra bump in demand, whether it be military, people coming in, and just demand for the time period. Like, so for example, if you're trying to find a house in July and close before school starts, same kind of thing as like if you're trying to find a house in October and close before Thanksgiving, right? And same goes in November if you're trying to close before Christmas. But main thing is usually it's before Thanksgiving. It's that time in October, late September, and early November. That range is the next deadline. That the heat map goes from cool in late August and early September, and it starts getting warmer into the reds and redder into October, into late October. And late October is like the very end there. You'll start seeing some weird pockets where it gets all of a sudden high demand. It's because those are the times where people are either able to travel and find a house, or it's right before they want to move into the holidays. That's another thing that happens. Okay. So, going to the next one. So, well, key point here is that there is a fabricated deadline. The point in this one, though, is that it's hard to tell exactly when it's going to be, but usually it happens somewhere in that range. Sometimes it bases around holidays because people often try to travel during those holiday time periods to make those decisions. And so sometimes you'll find that deadline going into closer into the Thanksgiving holiday, because they can buy the house during Thanksgiving range and then close before Christmas or move during Christmas holidays. These are not super, super common, but that's one of the things that can happen. Okay, moving along. I want to be closed before the end of the year. Sometimes tax related, others want to close when they have time to move. Okay, so that's the next thing. So once you get past the late October range, you've got usually a little bit of a reprieve in the middle of November, and then the heat map starts coming back up again into the late November, early December time period to make sure I want to get closed before the holidays. That first week of December is a big important like deadline, fabricated deadline sometimes. Again, now the one thing to keep in mind though is when I say talking about the heat map, talking about the demand, this is all relative to the rest of the season, right? This is not a springtime demand we're talking about. This is relative to other parts of the fall. So it's not like you're going to be competing with the whole world in the holidays. I definitely think that even still, it can be still a great time to find a house in the holidays, because again, not many people are willing to do that. But of the people that are, it usually becomes a thing where it's easier to find. It's harder. There's more competition with those people in the early part of that season. And then as you go into the end of the season, same idea. If you buy a house on the 20th of December, you're closing on the 20th of January or 10th of December, 10th of January. It's just more complicated as you get into January. So that's the demand goes down. Granted, the chances of finding the perfect house in that time period also goes down. But if you do, that you might find a good deal in that time period as well. So consider the deadlines. Just keep in mind, if you're trying to plan around your own situation, your schedule, think about what other people's schedules might be. And it might be similar to what you've got, or just think about just people in general, be school systems, whether it be work, holidays, or military transfers, that kind of stuff. So just keep that stuff in mind as you're doing your rental, as you moved out of the summertime going into the fall. Okay, I mentioned this already. There are demand, cold, and hot spots in between these quote fake deadlines. As you progress directly in between the two deadlines, you may get the best deal until you progress to the next deadline. I already kind of talked about that. Same thing I just said. Okay, so then we're talking about, let's go into when you find the right house. Okay, what to do then? Take quick and massive action. One thing I find all the time is that people often second guess themselves. They've been looking for a while and they try and find the right house and they think, okay, well, is this the right one? And they react differently. They haven't seen a house like this before. It is the one to them at that point, but it's like making that decision. It's hard to do, either because you've gotten used to living in that rental or used to being there for a while. You don't want to change again. I don't want to move again. You want it to be perfect. But just keep in mind, how many times have you seen the house that you love in the past 4, 2, 6 months or whatever? How many times have you seen a house that you love? And if it's less than 1 or 2 or 4, maybe 5, once a month, this might be a good one to go after, because you don't know when the next one might come up. And especially as you go further into the fall, you might not have the same amount of opportunities as you may have had or seen opportunities in the spring and the early summertime. Keep that in mind. So take quick and massive action if that's the one you want. And going to the next thing, have a spring mindset, but be prepared to swing softer. Okay, less demand, usually less aggression needed depending on the house or situation. Okay, having a spring mindset means being aggressive like you would have in the springtime. What I think people often fall short in it's a bad way to say it. I think people often will kind of swing and miss. I guess swing and miss is they'll always be just behind the demand level of a specific house or market in relative to the rest of the market. So if someone says, I don't want to pay asking price in the springtime, I don't want to pay over asking price in the springtime, but I want the best house out there, they might never find a house based on the current market situation, right? They might not ever find a house, but then they might say, well, I'll do that in the fall when there's less demand, when I can find the best deal. Well, then they might say, well, I'll just drop the price a little bit. I'll go under asking price. Well, then that same awesome house in the springtime might still be awesome in the fall time, but it might not be as aggressively needed to be offered on, but it still may go over asking price. But the person is still thinking one step behind what the rest of the market's doing. Does that make sense? So it's important to calibrate what you want in relation to what the rest of the market wants, so you know how to offer properly to get the house that you want. Because if you're always trying to get a better deal than the rest of the market all the time, and you're off just enough, you'll keep swinging and missing and wondering why. So having a spring mindset means being aggressive, like I would have been in the springtime, getting that get locked in, right? Figure out what the market's doing and get locked in, but then know that there's a good chance you might not have to be as aggressive as you would have been in the springtime, but still be aggressive. So swing, but just know that you got to be ready, but just don't necessarily be surprised if you may not have to be as aggressive as the springtime. Is this helping? Anybody comment? Hey, just tell me if this is helping. I want to keep going here, but I'd love any feedback or any questions. Feel free to ask questions. Next thing is trust your agent's judgment of the market for that house, the specific house. So that's important to know, because like in Williamsburg or Hampton or wherever, Newport News, Virginia Beach, there's a market for the city, but there's also a market for a neighborhood and for a house. So just because you're buying a house in what you think might be the perfect neighborhood, you think, well, I'm going to buy a fixer-upper in that neighborhood. Well, just because you're buying a fixer-upper in the neighborhood that no houses sell doesn't mean you can get a cheaper price on that house, because it's the neighborhood everybody wants. So keep in mind, know the market for the house, and also know the market for the house when the house hits the market. Next thing I'd say is For example, if a house hits the market on a Monday, you may have different strategies available compared with if it hits on a Thursday or Friday. This is a very important key little thing because not many people list houses relative to Friday on as many on Monday or Tuesday, but people do, and some great houses hit the market on those days. Not as many people are ready to look on Monday or Tuesday for a variety of reasons. They can't travel on Monday or Tuesday, or they're working, not thinking about it, or whatever. Houses slip through the cracks, and if someone gets a good offer on a Monday listed house on a Tuesday, and they accept it on Tuesday, you see it on a Wednesday, it's gone. They may have slid in there and gotten it, but on Thursday or Friday, there's usually often more people looking in those days, which might lead to more competition. It depends on the type of competition. There's some differences there and some strategies you can implement based on the type of when the house hits the market and where it is in the neighborhood or in the area. And next thing is use your shorter term rental period to give the sellers the time frames they need to move. So when you're taking the action, right? We didn't talk about this in the original part about strategies and using your strategies, using all the things you have at your disposal. But one of the things is if you have a short-term rental or even a rental period, you have some flexibility on the amount of time that you have to move. Some people, some renters, some owners might want to wait a little bit before they close. If you have the ability to let someone stay in the house longer, that is huge for getting an offer accepted. You can sometimes get an offer accepted cheaper, but keep in mind the shorter term rental period, you can use that to give the sellers the time frames they want to move. Some people want that longer time period to move. If you have that flexibility, and that's what having a shorter rental period can do, is it gives you that flexibility to give to them, to pass to them for that demand, for them to say yes to your offer. And I think it's a huge thing people don't often focus on. Next is do not try to save every dollar. Why do I say that? It sounds ridiculous. Well, because people often, again, focus on the idea of they want to get a house for the proper price. I understand that. Why would I disagree with that? I don't disagree with that. That's an important thing to strive for. But the important thing also is to remember what the reason is for buying a house in the first place. It's to live in the house. It's to enjoy the house. It's to be in there with your family or friends or whatever. It's starting your life in that specific new place. And if you're focused too much on just the money, you will sacrifice lots of memories, lots of possibly the perfect house for you because you're trying to scrape by and get the perfect deal on that house. You'd rather have the right deal as opposed to the right house. They're both important. You don't want to just throw caution to the wind again, but it's keeping all of that and factored in. And don't try to save every dollar. Okay, so use dollars to get what you want. What does that mean? Getting the house that you want. Be willing to pay an extra $1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, whatever that is. I'm not saying the money doesn't matter, but I'm saying whatever it is to you. If it doesn't matter, if you're going to spend an extra few $100s or 1,000, whatever dollars to get something locked down, in the grand scheme of things, if you thought back in a year from now, like, hey, is this going to change my reality? No, but is the offer being accepted because of a little bit of money? Is that going to change my reality? That did. That may have been worth the extra little bit of money. That's a great example. So use those as tools to get what you want. Free rent back. Another thing. Don't, hey, a person that if I'm giving someone rent back, if I'm letting them stay in my house, I'm going to charge them rent. Well, you don't have to. You can do a rent back and it not charge them. Again, you're going to make more money if you do, but just keep in mind, some of the best houses have free rent backs. That's very, 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 I see it all the time. So if you're trying to just save an extra $1,000 or $2,000, $3,000 because you're trying to get a rental agreement done because you want that rent, well, just make sure you're budgeting, make sure you understand how much, when you're paying your next mortgage payment, budget that out. So because you might not need that, you can do a free rent back and get a deal accepted right away. Extra month in the rental. So again, keep in mind, how much time do you have in your rental? Let's switch back here. How much time do you have in your rental? Be willing to take an extra month to move. Don't try and squeeze it all in. Time it exactly right. You can do that. We can do that. We can do that done it all the time. It can definitely work. But if it's going to stress you out and it's worth it just to stay in the rental for another 2 or 3 weeks, it's okay to do that, because again, it's not all about just the money. It's about that money also being used to make the house purchase and the process enjoyable for you and everybody you're buying the house with, right? That's the whole point. It's not just saving the money. Aggressive offer. Back to use the dollars, give what you want. If it takes being a little bit more aggressive with the escalation clause or higher, more earnest money or something to get an offer accepted, that little bit of money extra that you glad that you had offered, you think back and you're like, man, that was the best $2,000 I ever spent on something. You can ask yourself the question: if you lose the house by X amount of dollars, will you have regretted trying to save a buck? And if the answer is, I gave the answer, the highest that I'm looking to give, that's okay. But you're trying to find that offer, that max, and especially in an offer, multiple offers situation, make sure that you're doing the aggressive smart approach, which is if you were told that you don't get the house and it was because of like a $500 or $5,000 or whatever, you had the money to do it and you didn't do it, that I would rethink that. That would be very important. So next thing is get that house, go after it, get the house that you want. The amount of houses right now, the inventory is so relatively low. It's lower, I'd say, honestly, than it's ever has been relative to, I mean, the last couple of years. But there aren't enough houses hitting the market, even though rates have been up and have starting to trickle down just a little bit. There just aren't a lot of houses hitting the market. So if it's a house that you love, there are a lot of houses that don't get listings on the market in months or a year. So if it hits and you love it, go after it. You will be so glad almost always if you did. And if you're coming in there with eyes wide open and being smart with the process, you will be much more happy that you got the house that you wanted and you weren't trying to scrape that extra dollar, if that makes sense. So that's the general strategy. And this can be adjusted based on the season, but this is important right now because there are specific, a lot of these is that those deadlines I think are very important to keep in mind, because as we're going to the August time period, it's going to get slow-ish, but it's going to pick up again. Relative to August, that's one thing I think I mentioned. I mentioned this in August. The thing about August before is August feels very, very slow. Part of the reason why it feels slow is also because July often is like the end of the spring season. So then it just kind of comes screeching to a halt because of the seasonal situation that's involved. And it doesn't mean it's going to drop to the lowest there is. It will keep dropping, I think, over time in the next few months, but it will bump in the middle. Again, like I mentioned, those deadlines, go back and look at those deadlines, and you can kind of use that to kind of get a gauge as to how many people that you think might be interested in the same house that you want. So if you have any other questions, you can drop them in there. I love talking about real estate. I love helping people relocate to the area. It's what I do. I've done this for a long time, and I love doing videos about this topic as well. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the comments. You can email me. You can call me. You can text me. The last few days have been very busy. Got a lot of family in the area, but that will I'm working that through now. So you can feel free to ask me questions. Email there, phone number. I did that already. My website, you can go on my website as well. And I do like my website. I mean, hey, every person should say they love their website, but the reality is too, if you're looking for houses, there are things that Redfin does that my website can't do. And most real estate agent sites can do is they will show you when a house is contingent or under contract quicker and easier to see than most other places, as well as you'll see the houses hit the market right away. So if you don't have an agent already, you don't have a search built with them already that will get you the listings that come right away. If you don't have that yet, you can just scroll in Zillow on Redfin. Zillow is fine, but I've noticed that they are slower. They give you, I think, a misrepresentation of how fast the market moves. Redfin, I think, is a bit faster and more accurate. So something just to keep in mind there. So yeah, but that's it for this evening. I hope you have a great evening. It is July 24th, and we're about a week from August. It's exciting. It's hot. It's great, though. It's a great summer season, and look forward to talking with you. You can send me some emails or call me or anything. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that, BF. And anything else, feel free to email me. You can call me, text me, and I look forward to helping you relocate to the area. And I will see you on the next video.